The world's most dangerous cartel prisons. They are not just prisons. They are battlefields, hidden behind concrete walls. Places where some of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, cartels worth billions, continue to operate even while their leaders are locked away. Inside these facilities, authority is often blurred. Violence is not occasional, it is routine. And control is constantly contested. From Mexico's most notorious high-security compounds to overcrowded prisons in Brazil where gangs rule entire cell blocks. These are places where incarceration does not always mean isolation. In some cases, it means something far more dangerous. Before we go deeper, if you value detailed, factual documentaries like this, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Beyond the Bars. Your support helps us continue bringing you real, verified stories from places most people will never see. And comment below where you're watching from. When prisons become power centers. In many parts of the world, prisons are designed to remove power from criminals. But in regions heavily impacted by cartel activity, that system doesn't always function as intended. In countries like Mexico and Brazil, certain prisons have, at times, become extensions of criminal networks rather than barriers to them. This is not speculation. It has been documented in government reports, investigative journalism, and court proceedings. Cartel leaders have been found to maintain communication with the outside world. Some have continued issuing orders. Others have reportedly controlled operations from inside their cells. How this happens varies. In some cases, it's due to corruption. In others, it's the result of overcrowding and underfunding. And sometimes, it's simply because the criminal organizations themselves are more organized and better resourced than the institutions meant to contain them. One of the most well-documented examples comes from Mexico. Inside Mexico's high-security prisons. Mexico operates several maximum security prisons designed specifically to hold high-profile cartel figures. One of the most well-known is Altiplano Federal Prison, officially known as Centro Federal de Readaptación Social No. 1. It is built to be escape-proof. Reinforced walls, electronic surveillance systems, strict movement protocols. And yet, despite these measures, it has been at the center of one of the most infamous prison escapes in modern history. In 2015, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, leader of the Sinaloa cartel, escaped from Altiplano through a tunnel that extended over a kilometer. The tunnel was equipped with lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle mounted on rails. This was not improvised. It was engineered with precision. The escape raised serious questions about internal complicity. Investigations suggested that multiple failures, possibly including corruption, allowed the operation to succeed. After his recapture in 2016, Guzman was extradited to the United States. But his escape revealed something critical. Even the most secure facilities can be vulnerable when facing organizations with vast resources. And Altiplano is not alone. When control slips, prison riots in Mexico. While some prisons attempt strict control, others have experienced complete breakdowns. One of the most serious incidents occurred in 2016 at the Topo Chico prison in Monterrey. A violent clash between rival factions of the Gulf Cartel led to a riot that left at least 49 inmates dead. The violence lasted for hours. Reports indicated that weapons, including knives and improvised tools, were used extensively. Some accounts suggested that inmates had access to items that should never have been inside a prison. The conditions inside Topo Chico had long been criticized. Overcrowding, weak oversight, and the presence of organized crime groups operating internally. Following the riot, investigations pointed to systemic issues within the facility. Topo Chico was eventually shut down in 2019. But the underlying problems, overcrowding and cartel influence, remain challenges across parts of the prison system. And Mexico is not the only country facing this reality. Brazil, where prisons became gang strongholds. In Brazil, the situation has taken a different, but equally dangerous, form. Here, powerful prison gangs have emerged and grown within the prison system itself. Groups like the Primeiro Comando de Capital, known as PCC, originated inside prisons and later expanded nationwide. This is a documented phenomenon. The PCC was formed in the 1990s in São Paulo's prison system, reportedly as a response to harsh conditions and violence following events like the Carandiru massacre in 1992. Over time, it evolved into one of the largest criminal organizations in Brazil. And prisons played a central role in that evolution. In some facilities, gang members effectively control entire sections. They enforce rules. They manage internal disputes. And in certain documented cases, They coordinate criminal activity outside prison walls. Authorities have acknowledged these challenges. Efforts have been made to separate gang leaders and disrupt communication networks. But maintaining control across an overcrowded system remains difficult, and the consequences have been severe. The deadliest prison massacres. Between 2016 and 2017, Brazil experienced a series of prison massacres that shocked the world. In facilities across states like Amazonas and Roraima, clashes between rival gangs led to extreme violence. In January 2017, a riot at the Anísio Jobim Penitentiary Complex in Manaus resulted in at least 56 deaths. Just days later, additional violence in other prisons pushed the death toll even higher. These were not isolated incidents. They were connected to ongoing conflicts between rival criminal organizations, including the PCC and Familia do Norte. Investigations revealed that many of these prisons were severely overcrowded. In some cases, inmates outnumbered guards by significant margins. Control was limited, and when violence erupted, it spread rapidly. Brazilian authorities described the situation as a crisis. Reforms were proposed, including the construction of new facilities and changes to inmate classification systems. But the scale of the problem remains significant. How cartel leaders stay connected. One of the most critical questions in understanding cartel-controlled prisons is this: how do incarcerated leaders continue to communicate with the outside world? The answer is not always simple, but in many documented cases, it involves a combination of smuggling, corruption, and technological adaptation. Contraband cell phones are among the most commonly reported tools. Across multiple prison systems in Latin America, authorities have repeatedly seized thousands of mobile devices during raids. These devices allow inmates to coordinate criminal operations, maintain contact with associates, issue instructions to subordinates. In Mexico, Brazil, and other countries, law enforcement agencies have confirmed that imprisoned cartel members have used phones to continue directing activities. However, the extent of this control varies and is not always publicly documented. In some cases, officials have acknowledged that signal jamming systems are either insufficient or inconsistently enforced. And in others, corruption has been identified as a contributing factor. Smuggling networks can involve visitors, staff, or external collaborators. But exact mechanisms are often unclear, as investigations rarely disclose full operational details. What is clear is that communication is the lifeline of organized crime, and cutting it off has proven far more difficult than expected. Corruption inside the walls. Corruption is one of the most sensitive and complex issues within prison systems affected by cartel activity. It is also one of the most consistently reported. Government investigations, journalistic exposés, and human rights organizations have all documented cases where prison staff were implicated in facilitating illicit activities. These have included allowing contraband into facilities, providing unauthorized access or movement, ignoring or enabling communication between inmates and external networks. It is important to note, not all staff are involved in corruption. Many operate under difficult conditions, often with limited resources and significant personal risk. However, in environments where criminal organizations have substantial financial power, the pressure can be intense. In Mexico, multiple arrests of prison officials over the years have been linked to corruption-related charges. In Brazil, similar concerns have been raised, particularly in facilities with high concentrations of gang-affiliated inmates. The exact scale of corruption is difficult to quantify. Much of it remains unreported or undiscovered, but its impact is widely recognized. When internal integrity is compromised, even the strongest physical barriers can become ineffective. El Salvador, a different approach. In recent years, El Salvador has taken a dramatically different approach to gang-related incarceration. In 2023, the government opened the Terrorism Confinement Center, known as CECOT. It is one of the largest prisons in the world. Built to hold tens of thousands of inmates, primarily those accused of gang affiliation. The facility is designed with extreme security measures: no visitation, strict surveillance, limited external communication. Authorities have stated that the goal is to completely isolate gang members and dismantle their ability to operate. Images released by the government show highly controlled conditions, with inmates housed in large, uniform cells under constant supervision. However, the broader context is complex. Human rights organizations have raised concerns about due process, overcrowding, and conditions within the facility. Additionally, while the government reports significant reductions in crime, some aspects of the system remain under scrutiny. Because access to independent verification is limited, certain details about daily operations inside CECOT are not fully documented. What is clear is that El Salvador is attempting to solve a problem that many countries continue to struggle with. How do you contain organizations that were, in many cases, born inside prisons themselves? The United States, supermax isolation. In contrast to Latin America's challenges with cartel influence inside prisons, the United States has developed a different model, one built on extreme isolation. The most well-known example is ADX Florence, a federal supermax prison in Colorado. It is often described as one of the most secure prisons in the world. Inmates are typically held in single cells for up to 23 hours a day. Communication is tightly controlled. Movement is highly restricted. Contact with other inmates is minimal. High-profile prisoners, including those convicted of organized crime, terrorism, and espionage, have been held there. The goal is clear: to eliminate the ability to coordinate or communicate. And in many documented cases, this approach has significantly limited inmates' external influence. However, it is not without controversy. Critics, including human rights organizations, have raised concerns about the psychological effects of long-term isolation. Additionally, not all cartel leaders are held in facilities like ADX. Some remain in other institutions where conditions and control levels vary. Still, the supermax model represents one of the most aggressive attempts to address the issue of prison-based criminal control. When prisons fail completely. Despite different approaches across countries, there are moments when prison systems experience complete breakdown. These failures are often sudden and highly visible. Riots, mass escapes, and coordinated violence inside prisons have been documented in multiple regions. In some cases, these events are triggered by gang rivalries, overcrowding, policy changes, or internal disputes. One example comes from Ecuador, where a series of prison riots between 2020 and 2022 resulted in hundreds of deaths across multiple facilities. Authorities linked much of the violence to rival criminal groups with connections to international drug trafficking networks. Investigations indicated that control inside some prisons had effectively shifted away from authorities. Weapons, including firearms, were reportedly found inside facilities, though how they were smuggled in is not always fully disclosed. These incidents highlight a critical reality. When systems become overwhelmed, control can be lost rapidly, and restoring it can take years. The men who controlled empires from cells, behind many of the world's most dangerous cartel prison systems, are individuals whose influence extended far beyond prison walls. Some of the most well-documented cases involve leaders who, even while incarcerated, were believed to maintain operational control over criminal networks. One of the most widely reported examples is Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. Before his extradition to the United States, Guzmán was held in Mexican prisons where authorities later acknowledged systemic vulnerabilities. Following his final capture in 2016, he was transferred to U.S. custody and eventually sentenced to life imprisonment. In contrast, during his earlier incarcerations in Mexico, multiple investigations suggested he retained influence, though the full extent remains partially undisclosed. Another significant figure is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. As of publicly available information, Oseguera Cervantes has not been captured, but his organization has been repeatedly linked to prison-based operations involving affiliated members. Because he has not been detained, any discussion of his direct prison activity is not applicable, but his network's influence inside prisons has been referenced in security reports. In Brazil, leaders of the PCC, including Marcos Williams Herbas Camacho, have been central to discussions about prison-based control. Camacho has spent years in high-security detention. Authorities have stated that despite isolation efforts, the PCC continued to operate as a coordinated organization. However, the exact mechanisms of communication are not fully disclosed in public records. These cases reveal a pattern. Removing leaders from society does not always dismantle the systems they built, especially when those systems are decentralized and deeply embedded. The architecture of control. As prison systems have evolved, so has the architecture designed to contain high-risk inmates. Modern high-security facilities are built with a specific goal: total control. This includes isolated housing units, limited inmate movement, controlled communication channels, continuous surveillance. In facilities like ADX Florence, every detail is engineered to reduce interaction. Cells are often soundproofed or designed to minimize communication between inmates. Recreation, when allowed, takes place in enclosed spaces with no direct contact. Even visual access to the outside world is restricted. In Latin America, newer prison designs have attempted to incorporate similar principles. However, implementation varies widely. Budget constraints, infrastructure limitations, and population pressures often affect how closely these designs can be followed. Additionally, retrofitting older prisons to meet modern security standards presents significant challenges. As a result, while the concept of total control exists in theory, its execution is not always consistent in practice. Technology versus cartels. Technology has become one of the primary tools in the effort to counter cartel influence inside prisons. This includes signal jamming systems to block mobile communication, biometric access controls for restricted areas, advanced surveillance networks with real-time monitoring, data tracking systems for inmate movement. In theory, these systems can significantly reduce the ability of inmates to communicate or coordinate. In practice, results have been mixed. Signal jammers, for example, are widely used, but their effectiveness depends on consistent maintenance and proper installation. Reports have indicated that in some facilities, jamming systems are either incomplete or can be bypassed. Similarly, surveillance systems require constant oversight. Human error, or deliberate interference, can reduce their effectiveness. Criminal organizations, particularly well-funded cartels, have demonstrated an ability to adapt. They change communication methods. They exploit weaknesses. And in some cases, they rely on external intermediaries to maintain operations. This creates an ongoing cycle. As security measures improve, so do the strategies used to evade them. Isolation versus influence. At the center of the global prison strategy against cartel influence is a fundamental question. Does isolation actually work? The answer is complex. In highly controlled environments like U.S. supermax facilities, there is evidence that isolation significantly limits communication. Inmates have restricted access to the outside world. Interactions are minimal. Monitoring is constant. However, even in these systems, complete isolation is difficult to guarantee. Legal communication, for example, remains protected. And while heavily regulated, it can still represent a potential channel, though misuse is not always publicly documented. In less controlled environments, isolation is far harder to enforce. Overcrowding, resource limitations, and infrastructure gaps all reduce effectiveness. This creates a spectrum. At one end, near total isolation. At the other, environments where influence can persist. Most prison systems fall somewhere in between. And for cartel organizations, even limited communication can be enough to maintain structure. Can any system truly contain a cartel? Across continents, across systems, across strategies, one question remains unresolved. Can any prison system truly contain a cartel? Evidence suggests that containment is possible, but not guaranteed. Highly controlled environments, strong oversight, and consistent enforcement can significantly reduce influence. But these systems require sustained funding, institutional integrity, advanced infrastructure, and continuous adaptation. Without these elements, vulnerabilities emerge. And cartel organizations are known for identifying and exploiting those vulnerabilities. In some countries, progress has been made. In others, challenges remain ongoing. What is clear is this: the relationship between prisons and organized crime is not static. It evolves. And as long as criminal organizations exist, the systems designed to contain them will be tested. The future of cartel prisons. Across the world, governments are continuing to invest in new prison infrastructure designed specifically to counter organized crime. These next-generation facilities aim to address the weaknesses seen in older systems: better surveillance integration, improved inmate classification systems, enhanced physical barriers, stronger internal accountability measures. In Latin America, several countries have announced or begun constructing new high-security prisons modeled after stricter control environments. El Salvador's CECOT is one example already in operation. Mexico has also expanded its federal prison network in recent years, with an emphasis on isolating high-risk offenders. However, infrastructure alone does not solve systemic issues. Experts consistently note that long-term success depends on transparency, anti-corruption enforcement, judicial oversight, and sustainable funding. Without these elements, even the most advanced facilities can face the same challenges as their predecessors. The future of cartel prisons will likely depend not just on walls and technology, but on governance. The human cost. Behind the statistics, the riots, and the security measures, are human lives. Prison populations in many cartel-affected regions include individuals at different levels of involvement. Some are high-ranking members of organized crime. Others are low-level participants. And some are pretrial detainees who have not yet been convicted. Overcrowding remains one of the most widely reported issues. In multiple countries, prisons operate beyond their intended capacity. This creates conditions that increase tension, reduce oversight, and strain resources. Human rights organizations have documented concerns including limited access to healthcare, inadequate sanitation, prolonged pretrial detention. At the same time, prison staff often work under challenging conditions, facing both operational pressure and personal risk. These realities complicate efforts to implement reform. Balancing security with humane treatment is an ongoing challenge, one that remains central to the global conversation about incarceration. Lessons from the past. History provides important context for understanding the present. Many of today's prison challenges did not emerge overnight. They developed over years, sometimes decades, of systemic pressure. Events like the 1992 Carandiru massacre in Brazil reshaped how prison systems were viewed. In Mexico, repeated incidents of prison violence and high-profile escapes exposed vulnerabilities in security and oversight. In Ecuador, recent waves of violence have highlighted the risks of under-resourced systems facing increasingly organized criminal groups. Each of these moments triggered responses, policy changes, infrastructure upgrades, security reforms. But history also shows that reforms are often reactive. They follow crises rather than prevent them. And while progress has been made in some areas, new challenges continue to emerge. The global challenge. Cartel prisons are not just a regional issue. They are part of a broader global challenge: how to manage organized crime within systems designed for individual incarceration. Traditional prison models were not built to contain decentralized, highly adaptable networks. Cartels operate across borders. They use layered structures. And they often continue functioning even when key figures are removed. This creates a gap between the design of prison systems and the nature of the threats they face. International cooperation has become increasingly important. Information sharing, extradition agreements, and coordinated law enforcement efforts all play a role. But differences in legal systems, resources, and infrastructure continue to shape outcomes. There is no single solution. Only a range of strategies, each with its own strengths and limitations. Final reflection. Prisons are meant to represent control, order, containment, justice. But in the context of cartel power, those lines can blur. Walls can be breached. Systems can be compromised. And influence can persist in ways that are not always visible. The world's most dangerous cartel prisons are not defined only by violence. They are defined by complexity, by the constant struggle between control and adaptation, between enforcement and evasion. And as long as organized crime continues to evolve, so too will the challenge of containing it. If you found this documentary informative, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Beyond the Bars. And let us know in the comments, what topic should we uncover next? Until then, this has been Beyond the Bars.